And we'll start removing these 8 millimeters and then 12 millimeters to split this case. We haven't forgot about our front output drive shaft here, or our rear. I'm going to maybe show you that when we get a little bit farther along here and get this shaft pulled out of there. So we're going to go ahead now, loosen up these bolts. We obviously haven't got our oil pump off yet. We can do that here in a little bit. We wouldn't have to do that now. Just want to get this crankcase split for you guys. All right, we've got 5 12 millimeter bolts, I believe. On this side, this is the right-hand side, and then on the left-hand side, remember we had 3. So far, we have 8 millimeter bolts on the other side. We'll see how many we got here. Okay, I believe we got 3 8 millimeters, and we'll know more here in a little bit, because if we can't get this apart, we've obviously have another bolt or 2 stuck in there. Up here is a cap, and that is they've got a spring and a ball underneath this cap. I like to remove that. Sometimes that can keep our shift drum from actually wanting to split apart. So 17 millimeter, remove that cap there, and then we'll get ready to start tapping on these cases. We'll grab a rubber mallet or a plastic dead blow here and tap in a couple different areas to split this case. Okay, we take a larger dead blow here. This is a 4-pound, and you can get pretty hard on these areas here. What you don't want to do is just start beating and then find out that you haven't actually removed all the bolts that you need to remove. So like the back side here came apart really easily, the front side not so much, so that could mean a couple different things. Either we don't have all the bolts out here, or it's just being a little more difficult. So I'm going to inspect this front side here, make sure everything's pulled apart. Our prop shafts shouldn't be what is holding us up, but you never know. So you obviously want to make sure those 2 pins got pulled out of here, your crankshaft balancer. Okay, another tap on our crankcase here, and everything came apart. So we're at least this far out, probably 1/8 of an inch at least. Over here, probably 1/4 inch. And so probably more than likely we don't have any bolts holding us together. So now we'll continue on with our dead blow here. You can just see it splitting apart just like that. Now, I like to take, and actually it's a little brave of me, but I like to stick my fingers in here, and fingers and thumb, and try just splitting those apart with my hand while I tap on it. All right, now you can kind of see that most of our gears are going to stay on one side. We're tapping on this side, everything's being pushed this way. So now what I'll do is actually take my crankcase, set it up like this, and I like to try to keep all those gears in position exactly where they're sitting now. So if you take, and you can take your hands and kind of wiggle it up like this, get them completely split apart. I've got our clutch bolt that's still on here. This will need removed. So we've got now our crankcase completely split for this Suzuki 500 motor. Here's our oil relief valve. Here's our bevel gear going to our output shaft. I'll show you that here in a little bit. But then otherwise, that is it for this side of the crankcase. Our drain pan and our drain bolt is down here. And I believe I showed you how to service this engine. We should have definitely showed you that bolt there. So if you need that, check my videos out to see how you service this Arctic Cat. Should explain this bottom drain pan a little bit better. So I'm going to set this aside. We're going to get down into this bottom end a little bit more. You can see here we've had a gear that's kind of fell down. You want to make sure, what I do a lot of times is I'll take and I'll very slowly pick some of this stuff up. That way we can keep track of where these parts are. So this shaft obviously sits down into our crankcase here, and then you can take and see what that looks like with it being in position there. We're missing a spacer here, one drop down in there. Not a big deal. We can grab that, figure out where that goes. We've got our shift forks that's actually dropped out of place. You can see these are your shift forks here. A lot of times you can just take and pull these out, and then I like to put them back in the same direction that they were going if we can. We might have to wait until we get these transmission gears pulled out of here. So we've got our balancer gear here. Get that removed. This balancer gear, because of it having its weight on one side, you've got to get that in the correct position before you can completely pull that. And then our crankshaft too should just be able to pull right out of this side. We might have to come from the other side, give that a little tap. Our gear shift drum is here. We've got a spacer and a bearing that fell off there. We've got down there, so we've got a washer, we've got a bearing, and then a washer. That's the angle of that, or the direction of that. We'll set that aside. Obviously, we've got this gear here. That's an idle gear. Got this complete transmission set. Again, trying to keep all this stuff together. There is all of these gears. We've got a couple movable gears on there. We've got a washer that came off of there. Now that is where our speedo gear connected there. So, okay, our long output shaft. So we've got our front and our rear here, and we're gonna be able to just take and slide that out. Be really careful. You've got a couple different keepers here. This one's in the center. This one sits right down in there. You've got a keeper that'll stay on this bearing. You've got a keeper that'll stay on this bearing. But there are pins that also need to stay in there, so make sure you pay attention to where those are. But this is the only one that we'll actually need to remove. So I'm gonna set this output shaft aside until we can get the rest of the gears and the crank out of here, and then I'll be able to show you how to deal with the output shaft. Crankshaft then, just see so many times guys will grab too big of a hammer or a steel hammer and start tapping on this. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll take this cap here, the same one that we use to remove the flywheel, set that on there, that way we don't damage that crank. Okay, we got that crankshaft out of there. Now we can pull this cap, and then we've got our crankshaft completely out. Now we're gonna be able to remove our balancer gear as well. There's our crank. Set that aside. That's actually in really good condition. We'll grab this balancer shaft there, pull that out, set that aside. We've got one more shaft here that we need to remove, and that's just gonna, we're just gonna need to be able to get in here and take and pull this off. All right, now we've got that final shaft out of there. Now that is everything from what would be the left-hand side of our crankcase. I'm gonna set this aside. We're gonna deal with our output shaft now.